All right.
So,
Yeah, Amaka. I think I can just
hello,
take
Mav.
it up.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Are
Okay.
we good to go?
I think you can pick it up from here. Thank you. Yeah, we are good to go.
All right. Okay, okay. Okay, so guys, please drop a message in the chat, so I can see how many people are listening. Drop a message in the chat um, so that I can kick off already. Today we'll be looking at, oh yeah, I can see Uchenna. Yeah, good afternoon. So today we'll be looking at, REST APIs. We'll talk about REST APIs and we'll also, cover, I'm going to take some of these things off. Okay, yeah, let's just, yeah, I would also cover Postman, Postman the tool. So I'll show you how to download and make use of Postman. All right. Okay, so please, I think we can also drop the message so that others can join on time. Huh? We're going to take it one step at a time. So first off, we're going to talk about REST APIs, and I would kind of show you like a picture or kind of like a diagram on what a REST API would look like. Um, just to give you like a basic understanding of what we are talking about. Okay, all right. Okay, so yeah, if you cannot see my screen clearly, please try to let me know. Okay, just try as much as possible to let me know. So just to give you just to give us a basic overview of what REST API or what REST is, right? So the term REST basically means representational state transfer, and it's basically an architecture that enables developers to create APIs, right? So let me write some of these things down. So the first thing I just mentioned now is REST itself. I'll definitely zoom in on this. So REST means representational state transfer. Okay, right. And we also have I also mentioned API. Okay, so what exactly is an API, right? So we are saying that this is kind of like an architecture that would enable us to create, APIs so that we can enable communication between two machines, right? Between two machines, and we want to first understand, what exactly do we mean by API, right? So just to give you, like a very basic definition of what an API is. Let's assume we have two softwares or two applications, right, running in different servers. Okay, so we have two applications running in different servers. So just a quick one here. I'm going to draw something very basic. So we have application one, or let me call that app one, and then we also have app two. Okay, so these are two different apps. So I can give an example. I can just call this. Probably I will call this uh, Paystack. I'm sure most of us know Paystack, right? Or Flutterwave. And then I would call this option, let's say the Top Universe app, for example. So let's just call it TU app. All right. So this is the Top Universe app. This is something we're building internally, and this is Paystack, already existing. Okay. And this is just like one way to model what an API looks like. Ideally, these guys would definitely build an API to also communicate with maybe other tools or other services that they have, right? But now Top Universe is building an application. We want to communicate with these guys right here. So on the app here, this is kind of like the front end app, the app that customers would work with. So we need a way to communicate, right? So we're going to then build something. It's an interface, right? So we're building an interface, and this interface would then communicate with Paystack and feed, whatever communication we have here, down to our main application, right? So when the application wants to, let's say we want to accept payment or something, we don't want to, simply call the Paystack app or the Paystack API directly from the front end. Even though it's possible to actually use some of the patterns that have been implemented by Paystack. But let's say we want to really hide some of the details, and we don't want people to look at the browser or inspect some of the code in the browser and just understand what is going on there. So we are basically going to send a request, right, to an API. So it would look like this. You sent maybe like a make payment request, right? So let's say make payments. And this API is then going to pick up that request and process that request by simply communicating with Paystack. Now, the API here is, of course, a code, right? You're going to implement something that would accept your request from here and then, pass that request onto Paystack, right? So just like this. And we can call this process requests. Okay, so just to make sure this is okay. All right, so I hope you understand this simple diagram here. So we are trying to make a payment. We connect to an API that we've implemented. So the API in itself is a piece of code that would accept our data, do some validation, some verification, and then send that request to Paystack, for approval. If everything works fine. If everything works fine, then Paystack would definitely respond to the API, and our API would also, respond. So this is more like an interface that serves as a means of communication between two machines, because you have these applications hosted on two different servers, right? So this API basically works as that intermediary that creates the communication between both servers. All right, so that is what an API is. Now, when it comes to REST itself, REST in itself is an architecture, right? So I said that earlier. REST in itself is an architecture that enables developers to actually create APIs that can be accessed over the internet with a standard with a standard pattern, right? So REST in itself works with a standard pattern. Of course, your communication is still over HTTP, and I don't want you to actually get this confused when I say HTTP. I'm sure most of us know what HTTP stands for, right? HTTP basically means hypertext transfer protocol, right? And when you're browsing, you are basically browsing over HTTP, right? So when you're actually browsing the web, doing your regular stuff, you're definitely browsing over HTTP. Okay, so REST in itself works over HTTP. So for example, you can have the API of Paystack can be maybe HTTP. This is just an example, api.paystack.com. Okay, so if you notice what I'm doing here, I'm just trying to emulate the Paystack domain name. I know that their domain name is .com, and I'm just saying when you navigate to the API, this is basically going to take you down to their their web API, right? Which is a piece of code that they've implemented, so that other APIs or other applications can communicate with that code. All right. So just to clear things up here. Okay, so REST in itself works over HTTP, and when you are working with REST, it means you are basically following that standard, and that standard that has been created. So it's actually easy for developers to communicate with that standard. So imagine if you have some set of developers building their own API here, and you have some other developers here, building a different API. And at the end of the day, so this is API dot let's say top universe. All right, so let's say these developers are trying to communicate with this API, but for some reasons, this API is not a REST API, and they have or they are finding it difficult communicating with this API. Now there are other standards, right? If you check out the internet, we have GraphQL. We're not doing that right now, but REST API is basically that standard that would make these developers understand what these developers have implemented, because it's kind of like it works with a structure that they already understand. They are familiar with that structure in terms of how they send the requests and how they receive those response. They already understand that architecture. All right, so REST API in itself is the architecture that that developers would follow in order to build APIs that can communicate with other services. All right, and it runs on top of HTTP, right? Or a secured version of that, which is HTTPS. But yeah, that is not necessary in this diagram. Okay, so yeah, please ask your questions. Okay, Don Willie, yeah, ask your questions if you have any questions as I proceed. One thing I want you to understand is that you can actually use a REST API to, access data from your web services. You can use, the API, the REST APIs to access data from your database, right? And I just gave you one simple, example, but there are so many use cases you can begin to think of already. So imagine we have another application that we're building. So let's assume um, we're building an email server, right? Kind of like an email API, not necessarily like a full-blown email server. And we want to communicate with a third-party email service like AWS SES, which stands for Simple Email Service. So Simple Email Service. So this is a service owned by AWS, and then we want to build a custom email server so that we can actually build more applications that would always call this email server when they want to send email messages, right? So now we can actually build an email API for Top Universe, and then we can have other applications, maybe like the websites. Have the websites, we can have maybe like our mobile app, or probably we have like a job portal or something. Job portal. Okay, so now we have that API right here. I would prefer to drop this API here, and just to give us a diagram that makes more sense. So we have the AWS email service, which is the SES. So on the website, we have a customer, or a user filling a form, and I'm going to create that user right here. I would use this diagram. So I'm going to call this a user, right? So we have this user. This user is currently filling a form via the website, and this user basically wants to, this user have completed that form, right? When the user complete the form, the website is then going to, through the website, we are going to send the request, which is the user details, right? We're going to send the request to the API, right? And then the API is going to, after validating and ensuring that, the details are fine, the API will then send a request, down to SES to say, please, I want you to send an email to this particular user. So this user filled his entire detail, but we're going to focus on one major detail, which is the email, right? So through this place, we accepted the email from the form, right? Of course, you have like the form on the browser, right? On the front end. So it got to the email API. So the email API would validate the email. Things like checking if the email exists, or yeah, or if the email is legit, right? So after validating the email, so I would say validate the email and send a confirmation message, right? And the message is definitely going to be via email. That is what we want to do here. So when this has been validated, we're sending a message now to SES. So we're asking SES to send maybe successful registration message to the user's email. All right. Now you see what this workflow looks like. So this is basically our email API, communicating with other services, just to ensure that everything is fine. We don't do that straight from the website because your web code is actually visible on the browser, and of course you just want to make sure that you are not sharing any private key whatsoever from your front end. So that is done on the back end, which is of course your API. There are some systems that give you that flexibility to make some kind of request from your website. But looking at the gold standard, it's pretty much this the it's pretty much the right thing to do from the back end, right? You do that from the back end, and on your job portal, of course, you can also do the same thing, right? You can do the same thing. So when I mean the same thing, I'm basically referring to the fact that you can also choose to say this user would register to be on the job network, right? So if you register to be on the job network, we are also going to send your email down to the email API for verification. And if your email is right, we can say send a different. Let me move this a little bit. So we can say send send successful onboarding message to the user's email, right? You see, we just have like multiple workflows, but at the end of the day, we are communicating with that API. Now, this is just an example. There are better ways to, map out our structure or the process of, validating some of these things. But, just an example trying to make us understand what an API is and, how the API would work. Now, when we refer to REST in itself, the REST in itself, we're basically referring to the standard. So, for example, when we are sending this, we're sending this data over the API. There are some kind of patterns that we are also expecting, and it's pretty much something we call JSON, right? So, just to make this bigger. Okay, so JSON, so this leads us down to what we call JSON. I will share this with you guys. So let's just take something down. What exactly is JSON? If you have heard about JSON before, tell me what you understand by JSON in the chat. Yeah, while I'm also explaining. So JSON basically stands for JavaScript's objects notation. All right, so it's pretty much understood that your web applications are built with JavaScript, or even if you use some other languages, you use some other toolings. At the end of the day, most of them would compile. It will definitely compile down to JavaScript because your browser understands JavaScript when it comes to the behavior, or manipulating of the DOM, right? So it understands JavaScript. So the JavaScript object notation is a standard that was created um, that can enable multiple servers, interact with each other, especially when they are sending messages. So an example of a JSON object would be something like this. And I'll show you an example as well in Postman. So let's say you see something like this where you have a name, plus have name like John Doe, and then we have maybe departments, right? Okay, so maybe IT, and then you also have maybe country, Nigeria. Okay, so this is an example of a JSON data. So whether you are working on the front end and you want to communicate with the back end over the API, which happens to be a REST API. Let's say you want to save an item, you want to send this item from a form. This is what you would send ideally from your form. You would wrap it up this way. You wrap up the data this way and send it, over the API. So in our example like this, we are assuming that what we are sending here is basically something that looks pretty much like this. So I'm just going to change the data here. So we just have email, right? So this would be John Doe at email.com, and this would be the email. So just an assumption, right? So this is basically the email data, right? So this is what we're sending. We're basically sending this email data down to the email API. Then the email API would grab the email item and verify. So this is the property email, and this is the value. Okay, so this is what you send, and it will be collected. So even if you're sending, you're working with a different solution, maybe like a contact form or like a sign up form, right? On your sign up form, you pretty much send email and password, right? So it would look something like this. And of course, there are different ways to actually send some of these credentials. So this is when you work with REST, when you're working with the REST API. So we have like password right here, and then your password might be, maybe 12345. Okay. So when you send this, over the API, it gets here and it probably, let's say this is an authentication API, it performs that authentication and, maybe sends you the magic link to log in or something. The idea remains the same. You're working with, REST API, you're working with JSON. All right. So this is what JSON looks like. This is what a sample JSON object looks like. And it can be even more complex than this. You can have a JSON response that have like maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or even 10,000 data coming back from the server or more, right? I mean, way more. And when these items are coming back from the server, it can even be nexted. So you can have like nexted data. We can have maybe like address, or yeah, we can call this contacts. Okay, and right within the contact, you can then have like the next thing that looks like this, and within that next thing you can have like a Twitter, right? And this can be maybe John Doe 1, okay? And you can also have maybe phone, right? Kind of like phone number. And for the phone number, we can just put a random number here, maybe like plus 234 9123456. Okay, so something like this. So this is just an example, of the possibilities, right? So you have like the name, department, country, you have contact, and under contact you have Twitter and phone number. Which, when you start working with a specific language, to consume this data, you can always access this based on the index, right? So for example, we call this data equals. It means this can be data.name, right? Or data.contact.twitter. So depending on the tool or the language or the framework you're using, there will be different ways that are, kind of specific to that, language or tooling, right? But this looks similar to your regular objects, right? In JavaScript, which is why it's called JavaScript object notation, because it's similar pattern. Okay, so it's easy to work with, and we would use Postman to make some API calls, and I would show you. I would also explain Postman. That should be the next thing we're looking at after I receive your questions. So I am looking at the chat right now. So yeah, JSON, can I say it's a stringified data? Yeah, it's actually stringified, but you have to also understand that there's a standard, okay? So which is the structure we have right here. All right. Someone is saying, can we access more than 10 different APIs from other sites in a single website? Yeah, definitely. You can access hundreds or even millions of. I mean, it's not something we can really give like a measurement, like a value to. Okay, depending on what you're doing, or depending on the kind of action you're trying to carry out on your website. Yeah, so it's a standard method for transferring data on the internet. Correct, Chisholm. Um, JavaScript object. Oh yeah, so key value pair object. Well, yeah, it's actually key value pair, right? Or I usually call it property and value, but you're very correct. I think key value is kind of like the term you use for JavaScript objects, and when we say property, and value, it's basically the same thing. It's just the way we, I mean, we can always interchange some of those terms. Okay, so Zedic is saying, can kindly differentiate between REST and RESTful. So REST in itself is the architecture, and when we say something is RESTful, it means it actually follows the standards and the best practices of the REST architecture. All right. So REST there is the architecture, and RESTful is just the term. When we say something is RESTful, it's just the term we use in describing an API that follows the standard, the rules, and basically follows that architecture on the while implementing that API. Now you need to understand that we have other architectures such as GraphQL, right? I think back in the days, I used XML with Java, and even with VB.NET, and I think Windows Presentation Foundation applications. It's called WPF application. So, there was a standard called XML, right? A different standard. So REST and JSON is kind of like, REST is kind of like the standard, I would say, that is most popular right now, okay? GraphQL is also picking up, but yeah, so REST is still, the most popular option, in my opinion, right now. Okay, so I hope you understand that, Zedic. So RESTful is, when we say RESTful, it simply means our API follows the rules and standards of implementing REST APIs. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's jump straight into Postman. So I'm going to share. Yeah, I'm going to stop presenting first, and then I'm going to share Postman. If I can find that Postman right here. Okay, so yeah, so if you can see my Postman screen, drop a message in the chat so I can pick it up from here. So I think I have 19 of you on the call. I hope you understood what I've explained so far about REST and the standard. So please let me know if you can see my screen. I'm currently sharing my Postman interface. What we are going to do, I mean, Postman is actually a very wonderful tool, right? It has a bunch of things happening here. and of course you can do a lot of things here. But I am going to pretty much explain, step by step, the interface, so that you can understand, um, some of these things in the environment here. All right. So when you download and install Postman, this is what you get. Not exactly like this. I already have a lot of things open here. Probably I would close some of them. Let me do that. Let's close some of them. Okay, so this is pretty much what you have, and I will show you how you can create your requests and also collections. Postman, I think, is one of the best tools I have used for API development and management. Um, yeah, and it does way more than that. I'm using a free version, so you can see that here. You can of course upgrade, especially when you are working with a large team. You should upgrade and have a better uh, a better optimized environment, just to make sure it gives you, or you can even use more. You will definitely get more features, right? When you upgrade, definitely get more features. Um, so to download Postman, I'm not sharing my browser, but I'm going to drop the link. So you can simply navigate to postman.com. You can navigate to postman.com, create an account, and there will be a link for download. I will share the download link right now. So when you're downloading, you can download the yeah, you can simply download or use it on the web. You can use the web version, but you can also download the desktop agent, whether you're using Windows, Linux, or a Mac operating system. On Windows, you can just download the executable file, which is the .exe file. You can also install it via PowerShell, and yeah, using a Mac, you can actually just call a simple command. Um, I think you would see that on the documentation. So I'm dropping the link to the download page. So if you take a look at the download page, you can simply follow the instruction, and install this via your command line, or probably just download the executable file itself. Right, you can download the executable file and just double click on that to install, to install Postman, right? So what I shared earlier was the download link, and what I am sharing right now uh, is the website. Okay, so yeah, that is the website. That is the download link, and this right here is the website. Okay, so let me jump into talking about the interface. We have like 30 minutes to do that. So first off, you see we have a bunch of items here. I would explain those items one after the other. But let's start from here. So when I click on home, it takes me down to my homepage. Kind of like the dashboard homepage, and it shows you your workspace. I have three workspace here. I have a workspace for workshops, a workspace for top skill dev shop, and a workspace for Top Universe. Um, and yeah, you can also see you have the workspaces right here. You have the private API networks, API governance. So, there are multiple things happening here, but I'm not going to, dive into some of them because some of them can only be used on a paid plan. And these are not, the most important factors. But in the future, we'll definitely have a masterclass to cover, API design, right within Postman, down to mocking. There's something we call mocking, which is when you are testing the API with fake data, right? When the API has not been developed, but you are able to come up with a mock, all right, using Postman. So we'll definitely talk about that. I think the most important place is, when you get into the workspace. But before we do that, I want you to take a look at Explore. So let's assume you are trying to check out some APIs out there, some standard APIs like Stripe API, Paystack, Flutterwave. When you come down to Explore, you would find most of them. You can actually search, right? You can actually search. But just take a look at this. This is the Instagram API, right? The official Instagram API. So if you're trying to build something around working with Instagram, you can actually check out this API and see what it looks like, right? In terms of authentication, communication, and all that, you can actually see what it looks like and work with the API, right? We have the Twitter API, we have Zendesk API. These are public APIs. We have the PayPal API, Salesforce, and of course you can search. So let's assume we search for Flutterwave, right? So I need to really check. If I click on View All, yeah, so I can Oh yeah, back again. Sorry. So I can definitely search straight from here. I believe so. So let's search for flutter wave. So and I'm going to yeah. So you see we have Flutterwave 3.0. So this is a public API, but you have to be very sure if that is the standard API because most of these APIs are also published by some people that are not. I mean, some of these APIs are pretty much not the standard. But if I check this out, this is this Flutterwave API. So you see, we have charges, we have transfers. This is basically the API you would work with if you are integrating Flutterwave into your application. The bank's API. You see, you have the Rave API here. Um, yeah, you see you have the virtual cards API. So basically, they implement everything as an API. But I'm going to go back. So let's close this. Let's go back to explore, and we can search for maybe a Stripe. So Stripe. So if I search for Stripe API, you see we have the Stripe Developers Public API. And of course, if I click on this, it's going to take us straight to the Stripe API. So we can explore, right, with different versions, of course. But the latest version would be this one. So you see, you can actually create an account link. So these are basically different. We call them endpoints. So different endpoints that you can call, so long you're authenticated, and it would fetch, the data, so long you're authenticated. Okay, it would fetch the data. So you have different, categories, right? The set of APIs for checking your balance, for balance transactions, credit notes, and I mean this is pretty much the standard way to structure your set of actions, right? The set of actions that your API will be performing. So when you structure it this way, people can easily understand that, okay, if I want to work with my balance or retrieve my balance, this is what I have to click on, and I have to basically, call this API. But of course, I have to first, create a fork of this API so that I can have my own version, to play around with. Because you won't just, alter the API randomly and save it. You have to first create a fork of this API so it can be part of your workspace. We're not doing that because that is more complex. Remember, I said we are first going to you know um, do some basic tests. Okay, so we're going to do some basic tests. All right, so that is what you get from Explore. On the API network, you can get to see um, private APIs, which I think you can use when you upgrade, and of course, public API networks. So under the public API networks, it will show you some of the APIs that you have published, right? That you have published yourself. And yeah, so when you publish those APIs, since it is public and you're not paying for Postman, some of those APIs can be seen and accessed by other people, right? So other people can view your public set of APIs, right? So yeah, so that is the API network, and the partner API network is basically going to show you, like the bunch of APIs you have when you partner with other organizations, to build or work on the APIs, right? So I think this is coming soon. This is not launched yet, so I think it's something they're introducing. Yeah, it's a new feature. Okay, so let's go back to workspace. And I said this is the interesting part. So if I go to my workshop workspace, for example, you see I have a couple of projects I have created here, collections. We call them collections. So I have like the referral API, and this is just this is just a simple API. I think we use this for a test or a class or something. So this is a referral API. We have the certificate manager API that we could use to download our certificates or render our certificates on the front end. We have the Foodie API. I think I created this for a test as well. I was teaching some folks how to create collections. So these are basically the collections when you land inside your workshop. All right, which is the name of the workspace. Okay, if I go back to create a new workspace, empty workspace, so let's assume you're just starting out and you want to create your first workspace. I'm going to call this Maths workspace, and I'm going to give a very simple description. So a workspace for teaching uh, the cohorts 3.0 students. Okay, So of course, visibility, I can say this is personal. I only want, I want it to be personal. I can also set public, or I can, allow my team. Because when you create a workspace, you can invite people to your workspace. So if you set team, it means anybody you invite to your workspace can actually see, that API. But when I say personal, it means, I will be the only person to see, to be able to see that, workspace. So let's create a workspace. All right, so now that we have our workspace created, of course, you see it is empty. We don't have any collection. Um, yeah, we don't have any collection. So before I create a collection, I'll just give a brief, explanation of what you're seeing here. So a collection is basically, a set of requests that you can put together or group together, into a single project or a single folder, right? So when you have multiple requests, like you say, you have get request, post, and the rest of them, and then you group everything together into one base folder. You can have subfolders, right? When you group everything together into one base folder, that's a collection, and you will definitely use collections if you are, building something and you are just trying to ensure that every single request you make falls under, one folder. Like you can call the folder, um, maybe the name of your API is. And I'm thinking of a name right now. So we can call that maybe a tweet generator. So you can actually create that collection and call it tweet uh, generator, right? So that's the name of the collection. And then right within the collection, you can add multiple requests, or you can even add, a subfolder. And I'll get back to that. The API section here is basically where you create and define, your related, collection environments. Um, and I think in order to explain this even better, because sometimes you don't just use these terms to, since especially when you're starting out, you need to really understand what do we mean by defining collections and environments under a consistent schema. Well, basically, you can define your API by creating that API as as something we call a spec, right? We call it an API spec. So it's more like you have a bunch of text that defines your API. Now, from that text, you can actually make changes, make adjustments, make improvements from a single from a file, and then from that file you can generate collection from that file. Now, I think most beginners will not be doing that because you need to at least understand how it is done, which is the advanced stuff. Yeah, so as a beginner, you would most likely use collections for a while before you begin to create APIs from here. But I would definitely, we have a session, especially I think it's a workshop where I will teach you how to create APIs using a separate tool called Stoplight Studio. By simply clicking, and then you can export the code base that will be generated by that studio and just paste it in here. Once you do that, it will generate your API with all the necessary requests that you've designed over at using Stoplight Studio. Okay, so we'll get to that, but not in this class. So when we talk about environment, we're basically referring to the multiple environments that we have created. We can create multiple environments that would have different variables, right? So if I create an environment, I can add the local host address, or maybe the port number, or maybe even the secret token or something. I can basically add a bunch of variables, so that whenever I want to make a request, I can choose to say, okay, I am making a request today, and this is the environment I want to use because I have the specific details like email, password, and a couple of other things I have added to that environment, right? So you can use environments to group, the secret, variables, or basically the variables, whether secret or public. You can group those variables into environments depending on the project you're working on. If we're working on project A, it has its own set of variables, its own set of secrets. If we're working on project B, it has its own set of variables or its own set of secrets, right? So you see, when I click on environment, I can select like the authentication type, and I can configure that. I can also add those variables I mentioned here. So when I choose this environment, if I say this variable is URL, and the value of this URL would be localhost with port number 5000, for example, right? So if I create a new environment, this is a global environment, by the way. If I create a new environment and I put localhost of 2000 for 2000, whenever I am about to make a request and I select that specific environment, it will change, it will be able to work with that detail, when I'm making the request. If I switch the environment back to global, it would work with this detail. So you can actually have multiple environments here. And of course, you see an environment is a set of variables that allow you to switch the context of your request. So context meaning, the application you're working on at that point in time, right? Or the set of credentials, or the set of variables you want to use for that specific request. So it's a very good way, to work with Postman, and we'll get to use it in the future. All right, so mock servers. So as I said earlier, you can create mock servers and test with those servers, basically simulate those endpoints, even though the main API have not been built with code, right? So you are able to create a mock server from by basically selecting an API that you have in here. We don't have any API for now, but you can do that, and then using the mock server, it can simulate that API as if it is already online. Just so that you can probably have your front end developers, start working already, even when you don't have, your server ready with code. Okay. Then we have monitors. So you can use this, you can set up monitors that would actually track and check the performance of your API. If you have published your API, you can set up a monitor that can always, run some requests over time, to check and see if your API is performant enough, or if your API is having some issues, or if it's been bogged down. Okay, so you can use the monitor to always check for performance and response periodically. All right. So yeah, this is a very good to have feature as well. Now flows. So what exactly do we mean by flow? So flow helps you create applications by connecting series of requests on an infinite canvas. So what this is, and I have used this multiple times. I think the way I want you to understand this, we're not going to really dive into the detail because it's pretty much the complex part as well. Using Postman, you can set up flows and drag. You can create blocks, and then you can drag and you can basically use those blocks to connect to different actions, and then use that to set up your API. So if something happens, if somebody calls this trigger, right, do this. Okay. So I say when I start, I want to create a request. I want you to make a request to this specific API, endpoint within this collection. I don't have any API endpoint for now, right? This is the collection we created, but there's nothing here. So when you start, I want you to make a request to this. When that request is done and it comes back with some response, grab the response and use the response to make another request to this. So when you trigger that and you call it, it's basically going to perform that flow and then give you a final response. So I think you will definitely use flows if you are the kind of person that loves, setting up pipelines and automation or workflows. Yeah, but trust me, you will get to learn that and you will love it, but don't try to rush it. Okay. I would advise you, start from the basics, which we're going to dive back into. But at least you understand, the concept, so that it doesn't look, so foreign to you. So the final thing here, history. So when we start working, you're going to be seeing, most of the history, most of the requests we make is going to show up here, right? When we make a request here, it's going to basically show up in the history, just to show you some of the, requests you've made over time. Okay. All right. So that is what we have on this side pane. Let's close this for now. Let's close this as well. And we are going to, yeah, so I think this is how you would invite someone. So if you want to invite someone to our workspace, you have to click on this. You can invite your friends and get to work with your friends. You can invite them via email, or you can actually copy the invite link and share with them. Okay, and yeah, under your settings, of course, you know what happens, right? So basically, you can set your theme, to light or dark theme, or you can use the system default theme. You can actually configure most of these things here, but I think since you're starting out, please work with the defaults because it's pretty much optimized enough for you. Yeah, these are the shortcuts and the keyboard bindings. And if you have plans to import data or export data, yeah, you can do some of those things from here. You can actually use add-ons, and you install those add-ons using the Postman CLI called Newman. So you can download that from npm. We'll do this, when we have our masterclass. And I believe if you're part of that masterclass, you will definitely learn a lot, from working with Postman. You will definitely become at least you will have superpowers working with Postman, right? If there's an update, your update shows up here, and you can actually check for updates, or it would ask you to install the updates that it was able to find. All right, so this is the about section. So let's leave this place for now. And when I click on my profile, I can actually view my profile. I can create a team. I can sign out. I can also add more accounts. If I have multiple accounts, I can switch from one account to the other. That is pretty much it for the interface, right? And one more thing we have here, I think I almost skipped this. So when we start making requests, your request would show up here, the logs. When we say logs, it's just like taking track, keeping track of the request you've made. So the logs will show up here if there's an error, or if something went wrong, you would see that right here in the log. You can use find and replace to basically search for items and replace them when we start taking some of those requests. And I think one more thing is, yeah, so when you delete some items, it will definitely show up in the trash. When you delete some of your requests, it will show up in the trash. And of course, you can clear your trash after a while. So good. Let's start by creating our sample collection. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to be working with an API that is already existing. The name of that API is, someone is saying the screen is not clear. I think it's actually your network. We have some other questions. Please, sir, can you give us your LinkedIn idol? I can do that after the session, or you can meet me on Discord. I always, do that on Discord. Um, there is a VS Code extension which you can use to test API. Yeah, it works perfectly like Postman. Agreed, agreed. So I don't think you should say it works perfectly like Postman, right? Eben for Christ. I don't think you should say it works perfectly like Postman. You can say it does the work that you need it to do, right? And I know the name of the tool you're talking about. I've used it for a while, but when you start doing a bunch of advanced stuff, trust me, some of those tools will not even cut the mark for you. Okay. I think the next tool I can recommend, if not Postman, would be Insomnia. I also use that tool, but I think Postman is pretty much the gold standard. We have tools like Swagger, right? But trust me, Postman has more to offer. And I also mentioned Stoplight Studio. I am mentioning some of these tools because I have used multiple tools, right? In terms of working with API, right? And when we start designing APIs, you get to understand what I mean. So someone is asking, after designing and testing your API, what next? Well, after designing your API, and you are able to have your API within Postman, you can probably use your spec to scaffold or generate code that you would use in Python or JavaScript, right? And when you're done implementing those codes, that spec is what you publish, right? So when you want to imagine you are working with the front end team, you don't always want to invite them to Postman. You can publish the collection and give them a URL. So when you give them that URL, and I'm going to share my entire screen just to make sure you get the bigger picture of what I'm talking about. But we have not even okay. So I don't think now would be the right time, but we can discuss some of these things later. So when you design your API and you put it in Postman, you can generate a collection, you can test and do your mocking and all that. When you're done, you can publish that API and you can have the front end team use your API to then build their front end application, right? They don't need to come to Postman. They will just work with that URL and they start connecting the application to your API because your API have been published, right? It has been published, and you can pretty much publish your API from Postman. So we're going to do that. Now I'm simply going to navigate to a website called uh, JSON placeholder. So I'm going to drop the link as well. It's already it's a website basically used for testing, just testing, um, or just yeah, probably just building simple front-end applications, more like when you're teaching or something. We have so many of them, right? We have so many of them. So I'm going to make a sample request. When I'm done, I will give you a website where you can access a lot of public APIs that you can play around with. Okay, please remind me in the chat, or you can drop that as a message so I don't forget. So right now, I'm still sharing my Postman. I am going to click on plus here, and I'm going to create a new collection, and I'll just call this collection sample collection. Now, within this collection, I want to add some requests. So when I click on this drop down, I can say add request, or I can simply, click on this sign you see here, and I can just, say new request. So let's see if we can do that. Add request, right? Okay. So I'm just going to click on this, add request, and we have a get request. So let's give that request a name. First off, I want to paste the URL from JSON placeholder. This says it is going to fetch me the first to do item, right? This is the first to do item, and that has to be a get request. Now, what exactly is a get request? So when we're talking about get request, the get request, post, put, patch, delete. You see, we have a lot of them, and in terms of the standard options, right? We have get, post, put, patch, delete, and then when I say standard, I pretty much mean what you'll be using most of the time, right? So get is they're all called HTTP verbs, right? HTTP verbs, and I would also so HTTP verbs. I would add that to the diagram that we had earlier. So an HTTP verb is basically describing, what that single request should do. If you're using get, it means you want to fetch items, right? If you're using post, it means you want to send an item to the API. If you're using put, it means you want to update, right? Um, or you can actually, you can also use, so you can use put and patch, to do the same thing basically. As a matter of fact, you can even use one item to do basically, most of these things. You can simply use post, but it's a good idea to follow those standards, which is why I keep saying standards, so that when other developers see your code, they understand that get should fetch something, post should, upload or create something, put should update something. Patch can be used to update. So if you want to think about the best way to use patch, we can say we have created something, and we basically want to maybe add more items to that thing, right? We can use put to update, but we can then use patch to add more items. But of course, put can be used to do that even without having to use patch. Okay, delete is what you would use to delete something, right? To delete something from your API, right? To delete a specific, to send a delete request, to send a delete request. So now we want to fetch a single item, and we're using get. What happens when I send this? Let's see what we get. So you see, if you look at the request here, and I'm going to zoom in on this. Yeah, let's see if I can reduce this a bit. I cannot. Okay, so if you look at the request, the response here, when I make this request by clicking on send, I get my response here, right, which is carrying this pretty option. I can see the raw version, or I can choose to preview this more like a web page preview. But the standard way to actually check this is using the pretty version, because it can format it properly, right? And this item is the response is coming back as a JSON item, right? So this is a JSON object, as you can see. Okay, and yeah, so it's pretty much giving us the first to do item using a get request. So what can we call this? We can call this get single to do item. All right, or we can simply say get. Oh yeah, I think that works. Get single to do item. So we can also add a different request, and we can call this get all to do items. All right. So when I paste this link here, I'm going to take off the /1 just to fetch, basically, I think about 100 to do items, as you can see here. Now, I want us to, kind of like dissect this URL that you're seeing now. Now, what you're seeing here is basically what we call the base URL, or the base endpoint, because this is kind of like the domain name, right? So HTTPS JSON placeholder.typicode.com. When we put slash to do, this is basically the endpoint, or the part we are trying to get something from. Now, are we just assuming this? No, no, no. So this is based on what have been implemented by the developers that built this API, right? If we are building our own API, we can choose to change the name. We can choose to give it the name that works for our specific use case. When we work on an example together, I would show you, we'll implement something using JavaScript, and we'll work with it. Okay, so this is how you get all the API, all the data, simply using the get request. Now, if you want to delete, and I'm looking at this from the website because I got it from the website. So I think the best thing I can do right now is to probably share the entire screen. so that you can see how I am, where I am getting this from, right? So I'm sharing my entire screen now, and I'm simply going to take you straight to the website. Unfortunately, I would only check your message, when I'm done, explaining this. So this is the website itself, JSON placeholder, and as you can see, it's telling us that if we call the slash post, it's going to give us it's going to give us 100 posts, and basically this is, these are all get requests, right? So let's try that. So if we say get all posts, so what I would do, to structure this even better, is to add new custom, folders, right? So I can call this first folder posts, right? Because that is for posts. The next folder I can call that comments, right? So I can add a folder and I can call that comments, right? So let's just stop here for now. So for the these are to-dos. We are not working with any to-do for now. I think I should instead add a folder and call it to-dos, and then I can move these items right inside to-dos. Now it is well, structured. Okay. Now for posts, we only have one for now, which is to fetch the posts. So I can simply add a request, and of course, you have to also add the URL, right? Because that's our endpoint. So add the URL slash post, right? That's our base URL, and then slash post. So when I call this, I'm going to fetch all the posts. You can see we have all the posts right here. And what can we call that? You can say get all posts, right? It's a good idea to always name your request so that you can understand what that request would do. Okay. And for comments, we can get 500 comments. So let's do that. I am simply going to copy this URL and then create a new request. That is a get request as well. I'm going to enter this here and I'm going to change this to comments. So when I call that, it's going to give me 500 comments, and I can save this. Okay, remember to also edit the name and say get all comments. All right, so how about we want to perform other requests, things like we simply want to maybe get a single comment. So now you see we have the routes. This is how you get all posts. This is how you get a single post. This is how you get a single comment based on the comment ID, based on the post ID. So every post would have, its comments. So we can do that under comments. Of course, we can say create a new request, and we can call that request get comments for for specific posts. Right? I can paste this in here. Always remember to put in the URL as well. And of course, we're repeating this URL, but we can, use the environment to fix that so we don't have to repeat. But since we don't have enough time, I won't be able to show you how to do that on this call, except I show you that during our Q&A session tomorrow. So I'm just going to, now we're trying to get all the comments for the first, post. So if I send this, it's going to give us the comments for all the comments for that single post, and you can see we have those comments right here as responses. Okay. um yeah, so how can we create a new post? Now you can see we have an endpoint to basically create a new post. We basically have to use let's create a new request, and we can call this slash posts. The same endpoint, but this time around with a different verb. So we're using the post verb, and we want to send that request. So we have to put in our data, inside the body, right? We have other parameters here. I would explain this during our Q&A session. But just to give you like an heads up, the parameter area is where you put in, more parameters. For example, I can say we have user parameter. You see, I'm sure you know those query params, right, on your browser. So we have a user and we can add a value. Let's say the name of this user is Mav. So it's going to give you, you're basically adding this query parameter. So on your backend, you can choose to accept this query parameter and use that for your logic, right? But we'll talk about that when we are building an application. So for authentication, you can set up an authentication pattern because your data might be private and it expects to see your username and password before it can approve it. We would get to see that together as well. Then yeah, so headers are basically going to describe, what you can pass into your into the head of your request when you're sending that request, and of course, your framework can also accept some of those details and choose to work with them, depending on the reason why you choose to use them. Okay, so inside the body option here, I can simply select raw, right? and I can then select JSON because we're trying to send a JSON item. Now, can we send other items? Yes, of course. We can send a form data. We can send, a GraphQL data. We can send. So, this is just different kind of different ways to send data to the backend code, which is the API itself. Um, but yeah, we are going to use raw and we're going to stick to JSON. So I want us to create a new record here, and I'm going to just I'm going to first see what the data look like. So this is what data look like, right? So if we're creating a new request and this is a post request, you know, I have to put this in here, and then first off I need to, I think this is wrong. This is kind of like, oh, okay, okay, so yeah, that is right. I have to put in some details here. So what will be the title of our post? We can say learning how to work with Postman. And for the body I can say today we learned fundamentals working with Postman and sending JSON data using Postman. Okay, so this is what we are sending. Of course, we can't really specify the ID. I think all we really have to specify right now would be the title and the post. But yeah, we need to test this. So we can test this by simply sending. And if it works, then it tells you that 201, it was created, right? It was created, and this is your new data. Now, of course, it was not saved because you are not the owner of that, API. So, but it's telling us that this is how we would send it. It worked, right? Now, assuming we did not send the title, for example, which is an important item to send, it was able to go through, but of course, we did not send the title. So, what if we don't send the body as well? Are we going to have an error here? So it also went through. Now I think this server is just making everything look so easy. Um, but on your server you would specify, right? You don't want to create a blog when the title or the body was not sent, right? So just because it's a demo trying to, it's basically just sending us what we sent in. It's not saving it, right? So whatever we send in, and if we don't send anything, it still created the ID and sent it across to us again. So this is just just it's just mocking that behavior, but it's not persisting that data on the server. All right. I think one other important thing that I want you to know before we end this session, that would be the the HTTP codes, right? So if I go back to my browser, I go to HTTP codes. So yeah, I think that there was a cheat sheet there. So I usually use Mozilla response code. I'll call them status code. To explain this. But this plugin actually gives me all the status codes, and I think I can actually just explain this from here. But I'll share this with you. When you open this, you actually have like all the details. So we have 5 categories of status codes. We have the informational response, starting from 100 to 199. We have the successful response that falls under the 200 to 299 category, and we also have the redirectional messages, the client error responses, and also the server error responses. You need to know how to use these items or these status codes so that when you're building your backend, you can at least tell the user the right thing that happened. If something went wrong on the server, you tell the user, oh, this was a server error, right? If something from the client is wrong, like the kind of data they are sending in, you tell them, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot process this data. Your JSON was wrong, right? So you can use the 400 errors primarily. You can use 404 or you can use 400, and they all have meanings, right? So we can see the meaning from here, right? So if I go under the successful responses, you see when you send 200, it means okay, everything went well, right? Your request was fine, okay? When you send 201, 201 means you want to create something. It was successful. I have created that thing. So take, right? 201 is what I'm sending back to the user to tell that user that this was created. Why are we using these codes? Is because we want, the front end guys would also understand these codes, right? So when you send them 201, they understand that this was created. Now, if you are sending them 201 and that item was not created on the back end, now the backend guy, you have made a very big mistake because the front end would assume and probably tell the user that their record was created, not knowing that you sent a message, telling them that it was created and it was not created. So you have to be very careful, and you have to at least use make sure you're using the right status code. 202 means accepted. When we get down to some of the errors here, if you are redirecting, you see we have 301, which is moved permanently. If I try this example here and I do something like this, so when you visit google.com, so just check this out. If I say call https google.com, let's see what we get. So now when I call google.com, it's giving us 301 moved, right? And it's saying this document has been moved. Now, of course, we know google.com is, active, right? But the thing is, when you're actually making a request to google.com, it is not opening on that specific google.com path. You can try that on your browser. It would instead move you to www.google.com. So if I open google.com on my browser, it's going to redirect automatically to www.google.com, and it's giving us the right response, telling us that this has been moved and it has been moved to this endpoint, right? So that is just what 301 is telling us here. It has been moved permanently, and we also have moved temporal redirect, which is 307. So when it comes to the errors, I'm sure you have seen bad gateway, right, or bad request. Bad request is when you send a request data that is not properly that the backend is not probably the backend is expecting something different, or the backend is unable to process it because there was an error in your request, right, or in the data. Okay, so 401 means unauthorized. So if somebody is trying to access a request and the person could not be validated, you need to send the person 401, telling the person that you are not authorized, right? So you have to probably log in again before sending that request. If you're sending 402, it means you're telling the person that payment is required. If you're sending 403, it means you're telling the person that you don't have the permission to access this endpoint, and you're getting a 403 because it's forbidden. If you're sending 404, it means not found. You're trying to access a request or a resource that is not found, right? And we have more. If you're sending a 500, where is that? Yeah, if you're sending a 500 error, it means you're telling them there was an internal server error. Please try again, or try again some other time. If you're sending 502, you're telling them that this was, there's a bad, this is a bad gateway response, right? So you really have to know, the exact code to use. And your question might be, do I need to know all of them? Yes, you have to. At least you have to know, the important ones you're using. But it's good to know most of them so that you would always, at least make the right decision. Okay. When we start designing APIs using a Stoplight Studio, it will be easier for you because Stoplight Studio gives you an environment where you can, select these things by simply clicking on what you want. If you prefer writing code as well, you also have that environment to write code instead. I'll send this link into the chat. But I think, I think this would work. You see, this is just like a short description. I would paste that in the diagram and share the diagram with us. Um, Honestly, I am confused. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to. That's why I said you don't need to memorize any of this thing here. What we explained and what we covered is Postman. If you don't understand what I have explained from the beginning, even using the diagram, then I would assume you did not join the call on time, and you can watch the video some other time, or you can join us on Discord when I'll be, breaking this down, or you can also ask others on Discord. I'm sure most people at least understood some of the things I did here. By the way, drop a message in the chat. Let me know if you understood some things. Right? I don't expect you to understand every single thing. This is your first class. Working with Postman, and what I've shown you here is just an example. When we start building applications, when we start building APIs, you would get to understand this even better. Okay. We covered a lot of things, but that's the point. You have a video you can always fall back to. All right. And as regards the status code, this is an example of a status code that you can see right here. We created a data, we sent this data, we used the post request to send this data, and it told us 201, it was created, right? When we made a request to get all the items, it told us 200, which is to say your request was successful. We did not create anything, we just fetched the record and we gave it to you. So 200 means this was successful. When I hover on it, you see it was able to also explain, telling me that this was a successful HTTP request. All right. So we're going to do more. We're going to, I mean, we've gotten to that stage where we can start, exploring and building APIs, right? And just to show you a couple of, let me first copy this item and paste it somewhere. I'm going to share this link with you. So these are our status codes, right? Yeah. Okay, so I think I should even paste that in my, yeah, so I can share it with you maybe as a PDF or something. All right, so I think if you have more questions, drop them in the chat. Then I have HTTP on, right? I think it's um, HTTP phone APIs. I don't know. I think I'm probably making a mistake with the name. So um, let me just search for API. So I actually have there's a collection of APIs. Can't remember the exact location, but I want to share that with you. So let's see, developments. Um, okay, I'll probably share that with you on Discord. Please remind me. I'll check for the name and share it with you. It's just a repository, or a collection of, a bunch of APIs that you can, play around with and, test them to see how you can use them to practice how to use Postman, um, public APIs. So we have a lot of public APIs on Rapid API, but that is not the one I wanted to share. So yeah, ask your questions in the chat. Let me take some of them. Please ask your questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen for now. If you have any questions, please ask. Once is yeah, okay. Just let me give us like 3 minutes. I'll take your questions. 3 minutes. Ask your questions, please. Okay, I think I found it. It's called API list.fun, right? Yeah, so I can share that with you now. API list.fun. If you have more questions, ask me. For those asking of my LinkedIn handle, I would also drop that in the chat. But yeah, you can actually just head over to Discord. I'll be online. I'll be active for a while. Ask your questions or bring your questions down to Discord, if that works best for us. All right. Thank you very much, Emanuela and Amaka. I think yeah, over to you.
So hi everyone, to take your questions. If you're here to follow on, please go ahead and I'll see you by 8 p.m. Watts
Yes.
and
Sorry,
10 p.m. EAT
your
or
network
whatever
is.
time zone you're coming from. Bye, guys.
I don't think they heard you. I
Yeah,
don't
it's
think they
breaking.
heard you.
I think it was
Yeah,
from my
because your
end.
network was breaking. But that's fine. I think what Amaka just said is we'll see you guys by 8 p.m. I think you have another class by 8 p.m. So please make sure you show up for that class. And if you have more questions, of course, I said you can actually reach out to me on Discord. As for my LinkedIn handle, I'm dropping that in the chat right now. So yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So that is linkedin.com/super developer. Right. So that is my LinkedIn handle. Feel free to connect with me. Thank you very much and do have a wonderful day.